The whistle blew on June 14th, but if we're being honest, the match started long before that. The moment FIFA dropped that gleaming bait, 32 clubs, 63 matches, $1 billion in prize money, this wasn't going to be just a tournament. It was going to be a spectacle, a test, a sales pitch, a rehearsal dinner for 2026, except the groom was money and the bride was attention. And yet, somehow, despite the gloss, the noise, the stadiums named after insurance companies, it gave us moments that pierced through, moments that hurt, moments that dazzled. This is not a recap, this is a reliving across the pitch. Let's start with the scale, because that's what hit you first, like walking into a supermarket to buy some bread and realizing it's Costco. It wasn't a club tournament anymore. It was the UEFA Champions League and Coachella and the World Cup's weird cousin all crashing a 4th of July barbecue. 63 games across 12 U.S. cities on pitches that had hosted the NFL just months before. They packed MetLife with over 81,000 people. 81,000. Not for the Super Bowl. For Chelsea versus Paris Saint-Germain. You could hear it on the broadcast, the thrum of it like a living thing. A roar that sounded confused, excited, skeptical, like it didn't know if it was watching soccer or getting sold to. But it stayed. And that means something. Because attendance wasn't perfect. There were matches where you could hear the concession guys' footsteps echo off empty rows. Some games felt like glorified friendlies in a mall. And yet the total fan count? Nearly 2.5 million people. That's not nothing. That's not even pretty good. That's historic in context. It's proof that if you dangle enough club royalty in front of an American audience, Real Madrid, Paris, Chelsea, Boca, Flamengo, they will come, even if they don't know how the offside rule works. Especially if there's fireworks. And there were fireworks. On the field, in the sky, on the screen. FIFA ran the show like they were afraid we might look away. You want a halftime show? Here's Pitbull. You want pre-match drama? Here's drones spelling PSG above the Rose Bowl. You want innovation? Here's a referee wearing a body cam as if the solution to anger at officiating was making us see just how bad the view is when you're surrounded by 10 sweaty millionaires yelling in 6 languages. It was absurd. It was brilliant. It was American. And it worked. That body cam thing? That was wild. Suddenly, you're the referee. You see the shirt tug. You hear the striker scream like he's been stabbed when the replay shows a gentle brush of the sock. And for a second, you get it. You get how hard it is. Maybe too well. Some people said it humanized the officials. Others said it exposed them. Either way, it added something. A jolt, a presence, a sense that you weren't just watching football. You were dropped into the storm of it. And storms there were. Literal ones. Lightning delays in Houston, heat exhaustion in Vegas. It was as if the skies themselves were unsure if this whole thing should be happening. Thunderclaps timed like dramatic punctuation marks. What is this? A real tournament? A beta test? A marketing stunt with a final? But even if it was all of those things, it gave us a final. Chelsea, Paris, MetLife. 81,000 bodies pressed into plastic seats and even more pressed into their couches around the world. The stakes didn't feel manufactured, they felt earned. Chelsea, punching their way through in that slow-burning, grinding way they do. Paris, somehow glamorous and doomed all at once, like a movie star walking into a trap. The final wasn't the best football match of the year, but it didn't need to be. It was a signal flare, a billboard, a declaration that yes, America can host this game at scale, that you can pour billions of dollars into something and, shockingly, it might not be a disaster. That a club competition, planted in foreign soil, can bloom. But just as the flower opened, politics crept in like a weed. There he was. Donald Trump, in the flesh, on the stage, at the trophy podium, smiling like he just scored the winner. There's something uniquely American about a political figure inserting himself into a sporting climax like that. And it wasn't subtle. There were cheers, there were boos, there were medal mix-ups and viral rumors that he pocketed one like a party favor. For Chelsea, it was a strange kind of coronation. One shared with a man who had nothing to do with the game and everything to do with the narrative. That's the thing, isn't it? The tournament tried to be pure competition, but kept slipping into performance. It tried to be about the clubs, but it always risked being about something else. The politics, the money, the show. Still, there were players who didn't care about the show. Who fought. Who bled. who played every minute like they didn't know, or didn't care, how strange the whole thing was. And that's what made it real. Because despite everything, despite the marketing, the medal fumbles, the storms, and the spectacle, there were still goals that made your heart stop. There were tackles that made you wince. There were saves that made you shout at your TV like it could hear you, moments that could never be scripted. And in the end, isn't that why we watch? Even when everything around the game felt inflated, oversized stadiums, oversized ceremonies, oversized egos, there were still moments when it shrunk down to something raw, something human. You'd forget the drone shows, the fireworks, the ref cams. You'd just see two players sprinting after the same ball, neck and neck, with nothing between them but intent. That's football. That's what survived the spectacle. But make no mistake, this wasn't a utopia of pure sport. There were cracks, and sometimes they weren't cracks, they were gaping holes. The match calendar, for one, was a war crime in slow motion. Player welfare was treated like a line item on a spreadsheet, acknowledged, bolded, and then ignored. These weren't robots. These were human beings jetting from one continent to another, playing through heat waves and humidity, often with 3 days of recovery, if that. And yet, we kept demanding more minutes, more matches, more moments. We want these players to be engines, but they're bodies. They break. Some of them did. And for what? Glory? A check? A trophy handed to you by a politician in a country you barely had time to explore? FIFPro, the Global Players Union, screamed from the rooftops about this. They had the stats, the data, the travel logs, the heat maps. Some players had played over 60 matches this past season, across 4 competitions in 3 countries. And then we asked them to play 6 more in July, across thousands of miles of American highway. It's like scheduling a triathlon during a fever dream, and then wondering why someone passed out in the middle of the swim. The pitch might be 90 minutes long, but the wear lives in the legs for years. And then there was the crowd, or sometimes the absence of one. Because while the numbers on paper were impressive, almost 2.5 million in total attendance, those numbers had asterisks. Big ones. There were matches where the camera cut wide and it felt like watching a dress rehearsal. Empty seats like yawning mouths, plastic chairs getting more sunlight than spectators. It wasn't always about lack of interest. It was logistics. Travel between host cities wasn't just inconvenient. It was a marathon. You could see it in the fan sections. A few ultras here, a stray jersey there, the sound of a chant trying to bounce off concrete and getting swallowed by space. And ticket prices? Let's just say FIFA priced these matches like they were selling Super Bowl access, and then acted confused when people chose to stay home and stream it illegally. Midweek matches in cities like Houston and Kansas City became exercises in endurance. Heat indexes over 100 degrees, kickoff time set for European TV audiences, public transit systems that looked at you and said, "I can't help you." But here's the thing. Some cities got it right. Miami showed up. MetLife sold out. Charlotte cracked 70,000 for Real Madrid versus Pachuca, which on paper sounds like a Champions League fever dream, but in person was a vibe. The people came, maybe not everywhere, maybe not every night, but when they did, you felt it in your bones. Still, for every crowd that roared, there was one murmured. And that's the paradox of this Club World Cup. It was both a triumph and a warning, a glorious showcase and a cautionary tale, the proof that this thing could work and the evidence that it still might break under its own weight. Because let's talk about the tournament format for a second. Expansion to 32 teams made sense on a spreadsheet. Diversity, global inclusion, the spirit of the game, beautiful words. But in practice, it was messy. Qualification rules range from sensible to suspicious. You had continental champions like Al Ahly and Urawa Red Diamonds battling for respect, while Inter Miami showed up via host slot. Translation, Lionel Messi gets in for being Messi. It's not that Messi doesn't deserve the stage. He is the stage, but the math doesn't lie. Inter Miami didn't win a qualifying tournament. They were invited to the party because the party needed a face on the posters. And that invites questions, not just about sporting fairness, but about credibility. If you're building a tournament on merit, then build it on merit. Don't hand out golden tickets and pretend they were earned. Because that trickles down. Teams see it, players see it, fans see it. and slowly the belief drains out of the competition. You can't fake gravity. Either it pulls people in or it doesn't. But for all its format flaws and political theater and weather chaos, there was one thing this tournament never lacked: ambition. Unapologetic, neon-lit ambition. FIFA wanted to plant a flag on American soil, and not just for the future World Cup. They wanted to prove that club football could belong here, not as an import, not as a novelty, but as a permanent fixture. And they might have done just that. Because when you strip away the excess, when you push past the drama, the optics, the chest-puffing podiums, you're left with football. Still flawed, still pure, still capable of stopping time. And if you stayed long enough to feel that, maybe that's the point. And let's be honest, feeling is the only currency that matters in football. Not the prize money, not the broadcast deals, not the meticulously photoshopped marketing assets featuring 4 players who've never met each other standing in front of the Empire State Building like they're starting a superhero franchise. No. What sticks with you is the way your stomach dropped when a keeper stretched just far enough. The sound of the net when it bulged on a volley from outside the box. The collective inhale before a penalty. That's the real economy. And yet FIFA couldn't help itself. This tournament wasn't just football. It was business school with shin guards. A $1 billion prize pool. $2 billion in revenue. It felt less like a sporting competition and more like a startup that secured absurd Series A funding and then launched with a fireworks budget larger than most countries' GDP. Clubs walked away with tens of millions for showing up, more for progressing. The winners? Chelsea? They took home a king's ransom, a bounty for their bruises. And that changed things. It made teams care in a way they hadn't before. You could feel it in the lineups. These weren't second-string squads playing for a badge on a promotional poster. These were the stars, the tired, overused, jet-lagged stars, and still, they showed up. Because money talks and screams. And apparently books you a round trip from London to Texas in the middle of your off-season. But here's the wild part. The tournament did generate magic. Not just money. It generated memories. It generated drama. And sometimes it generated chaos. Like the moment when the trophy was handed over and politics again barged through the door wearing a red tie. Trump on the podium was the kind of fever dream you have when you fall asleep on the couch after watching news and football back to back. And there he was, grinning, shaking hands, leaning in too close to the silverware. The optics? Bizarre. The discourse? Immediate. Did he steal a medal? Was he keeping the trophy? Was Chelsea's captain awkwardly shifting his weight to keep the moment from melting on live television? It was funny. It was uncomfortable. It was very on brand for a tournament that couldn't decide if it was about football or fame. The final minutes of a long, complicated journey, and suddenly, we're watching geopolitics cosplay as post-match ceremony. You wanted to celebrate the match. You ended up watching Twitter implode over whether or not the President of the United States just pocketed a piece of silverware. That moment almost eclipsed what happened on the pitch. Almost. But not quite, because Chelsea deserved to be remembered for more than a podium ambush. They were excellent, controlled, professional, cold-blooded, in the way only Chelsea can be when they smell a trophy. Paris Saint-Germain had flashes of brilliance, moments where you thought, oh, they might just do this. But flashes don't beat structure, and structure's what Chelsea brought. A blueprint. A performance made of muscle memory and quiet violence. They didn't dominate. They dissolved Paris in slow motion. But what about the rest of the tournament? What about the teams who didn't get the trophy, or the cameras, or the accidental presidential handshake? That's where the heart of this thing actually lived. In games that happened in half-empty stadiums in cities you forgot were hosting. In the way Auckland City held their line with the stubbornness of a middle finger. In the way Al Ahly played like the world was watching, even when it wasn't. In the way fans from 4 different continents ended up chanting over each other in parking lots while trying to figure out which light rail line went toward their hotel. This was a strange experiment. A sprawling, messy, overproduced, undercooked, beautiful experiment. And somehow, inside the sprawl, moments of real humanity broke through. Moments like a young kid in Denver holding up a hand-painted sign with the name of a Japanese striker most people had never heard of. Moments like a last-minute winner from a South American side that caused 3 full beer cups to be launched in ecstasy into the sticky night air. Moments like watching legends you've only seen in YouTube compilations warm up 10 feet from the touchline, knowing it might be the last time you see them play in person. Those aren't spreadsheet values. Those aren't return on investment items. They're feelings. They're the reason the game matters. And for all of FIFA's obsession with control, it cannot manufacture those. It can build the stage. It can fund the spectacle. It can fly in the talent and sell the rights. But it cannot, no matter how much it tries, script what happens when the whistle blows and the ball starts rolling. That's still football's job. And football, somehow, still showed up. There's this moment that happens at the end of a tournament like this, not in the stadium, not on the broadcast, but somewhere in the back of your brain, where you ask, did that actually work? Not was it entertaining, or did I get my money's worth, but something deeper. Did it mean anything? Did it shift the game? Did it leave a mark? The answer here? Yeah. But also, yeah, not the one they planned. Because while FIFA wanted this to be a flawless dress rehearsal for the 2026 World Cup, the Club World Cup accidentally exposed the seams. The heat, the travel, the weird kickoff times that pleased TV networks and punished players, the stadium bottlenecks that made entire sections of fans miss the opening whistle. It was a masterclass in we're not quite ready yet, and somehow, also a miracle that it didn't collapse under its own ambition. MetLife, a fortress one night, a logistics nightmare the next. Miami, electric. Houston, molten. Some venues were vibe factories, others were echo chambers with grass. And yet, the blueprint is there. You could feel it, like a shaky first draft of something unforgettable. The tournament forced organizers to confront realities no spreadsheet could fix. You can't host global football in a country built for cars and expect smooth transitions between airports, stadiums, and hotels. You can't schedule matches at 4 p.m. local time in Las Vegas in July, and then pretend to be surprised when players look like they're melting. You can't tell the world this is the future of football, and then hand over the mic to a head of state and hope nobody notices the disconnect. But you can learn. You can treat this like a warning flare instead of a victory lap. And if anyone at FIFA is paying attention, and I'm being optimistic here, they'll see that the real success wasn't in the numbers. It was in the noise. In the weird, wild, uneven noise of fans who still cared. Who still showed up. Who still sang their lungs out on a Wednesday night in Cincinnati for a team from Morocco they only learned about 6 hours earlier. That's the legacy. Not the money. Not the politics. Not the show. The legacy is that people still want football. Even when it's been corporatized and globalized and hosted in a parking lot shaped like a stadium. Even when it's covered in LED screens and draped in sponsor logos. Even when you have to Google where half the teams are from. People still want it. Still feel it. And that feeling, that's unkillable. You saw it in the tears after penalties. In the quiet nods of respect between players who'd never met before and might never meet again. In the way some fans lingered in their seats long after the final whistle, not because they were waiting for traffic to clear, but because they didn't want it to be over. That's the thing about football. It lives in those in-between spaces. The seconds after a missed chance, the silence before a shootout, the stretch of turf where someone makes a run they know they won't get the ball, but they go anyway. And that's why, for all its flaws, the Club World Cup 2025 mattered. Not because of who won, but because it gave us a window into what could be, into what football looks like when you let it stretch its legs on unfamiliar ground, into the glorious, chaotic, occasionally stupid act of trying something enormous and seeing what sticks. Yes, it was too long. Yes, it was too hot. Yes, it was too expensive. Yes, it was probably 3 marketing meetings away from turning every goal into a sponsored celebration by a toothpaste brand. But when the ball was at someone's feet, none of that mattered. So here we are. The tournament's over, the lights are coming down, the medals are packed, the clubs have scattered, the headlines are fading, but the feeling lingers, and if you're like me, you'll be chewing on that feeling for a while. Not because this was the best tournament ever, it wasn't, but because it reminded us, even for just one hot, bloated, beautiful summer, why we still fall in love with this ridiculous game. This has been Across the Pitch. over and out.